Thank you, Mike. I'm as old as my tongue and a little older than my teeth. Thank you for your introduction. I hope you can hear me with all this wires around. Anyhow, this is the story of a rural community defined by the catchment area of a primary school. In 1913, they had to build a new school because they had over 90 children. In 1964, that school closed with 12 children, and now there are 2 children. So it's a story of rural depopulation during the last century. The name Carsluith, Cars means a low-lying field, Cars. Luith is Gaelic for quick, and these were early meadows where we grow early potatoes, and still did until a short time ago. Now I can push this on. Yeah, you can see where it is, Carsluith there, on the east side of Wigton Bay. Early history. Cairnholy 1 and Cairnholy 2. That's Cairnholy 1, Neolithic, 3000 BC to about 1200 BC, to the Bronze Age. It was excavated in 1949 by Stuart Pickett, and they found various Bronze Age relics there. It recently has been studied quite extensively by Joe Proskauer. Anybody been up there? And he's really discovered that it was quite a sophisticated lunar and solar observatory, and that is the sun setting between the 2 stones there, the middle stones, on Midsummer's Day. That is Cairnholy 2, that's further up the valley. Again, a chambered cairn, there's just a single chamber there. And I went a few years ago, went up there on Midsummer's Day, and the sun rises with through a notch in Cairn Harrow, and at that moment it shines straight into that chambered cairn, and for about 10 minutes then disappears behind the hill again. So they were quite carefully aligned, these monuments. And that's a aerial photograph of Carsluith, and we're looking now at hill forts, Iron Age hill forts. We're talking about 1200 to 600 BC, and then on to the Dark Ages, 400 AD, so they're called. I haven't got a pointer, I had one, but it doesn't work. But you can see the shoreline there, and then you can see Carsluith Castle. So that's on the hill above there. And that's quite a well-defined hill fort. There's a picture of it. You can see the ramparts coming round, and it's overlooking Wigton Bay. And that would have been inhabited, certainly as the so-called Dark Ages, 400, 500 AD, after the Romans left. Carsluith is now in the parish of Kirkmabrec, which was once under Dundrennan Abbey. Then it was in a parish of Curdle, and that got amalgamated with Creetown in the 17th century. There are, no, wait a minute, it's not working. There we are, yep. There are 2 tower houses in the catchment area of a school. That's Barhome Castle, which has been really well modernised by the Brennans. Many of you have probably gone around it. Tower houses between 1500, 1550, 1750 were inhabited for about 200 years. This is, it's not working too well. That's Carsluith Castle. Again, that's changed quite a bit. And the old barn on the left there has been turned into a cafe. In Walter Scott's novel Guy Mannering, he talks about Ellangowan, and there's debate whether he meant Carsluith Castle or Barhome Castle. But on the shore below Carsluith Castle, that is Ellangowan Cottage, and that's what it was called in living memory. It was stone built, and it's now, all the stones are away. It was dry stone, and it's no longer a building of any sort at all. It was lived in by, those are, that's Mr. and Mrs. Moore. Mr. Moore was a pharmacist and a herbalist, and his wife, Mrs. Moore, was a howdy woman. Anybody know what a howdy woman was? Howdy woman is the name of someone who laid out bodies. She was either laid out the bodies of the dead or was a midwife. That was before the National Health Service. This doesn't work too well, but I'll keep squeezing. The school, right. This is the school, and that dotted line you can see is the catchment area of Carsluith School, which is what this talk is about. And it's really from the Kirkbride burn once at the far end to the Ravensall burn at this end. It's quite a small catchment area. The old school, you can just see at the end there, I have another photograph of it, and these cottages, one of those cottages here, again have been destroyed, but I'll come to that later. In the 18th century, there were parish schools. These were taken over by school boards in 1873. And in 1913, and they were looking at the school just at the far end there, they decided, the school board, they had to build a new school because there were 90 children in it, more than 90. It was overcrowded, it had no playground, it had no toilets, and it was too near the quarry. So they built a new school, that's just a graph of the school roll from 1913 to 1900 to 1970. And you can see initially the numbers went up and down quite a bit. That was for two reasons. One, infectious diseases. If you look at the log books there, you can see there's diphtheria, scarlet fever, whooping cough, many of these infectious diseases. And the other thing was that children were employed for the harvest. It was very important. So they leave school to help with the hay, etc., etc. And you can see 1913, a new school was built. The numbers rose, and during the war, they had quite a few refugees from Glasgow in particular at the school. And then later on, gradually, the numbers came down, and the school closed in 1964. I can't get this to work. Oh, wait a minute. This is a real nuisance. Sorry about this. If I can get this thing to work. Yeah, that's school children in about the 1920s. There were about 40 there, and then you move on a bit to later on, early 60s, and there were just about 20. So the school roll came down very rapidly during the last century. The village hall. Oh, gosh. So I really can't get. Do you have a better thing for what? Oh, there we are. Okay, we're getting. No, we're not actually. That's not the direction I want to go. This actually doesn't work.
You want me to operate it from here?
Sorry about this. Come on, I just do. Can you do it from there? Okay, that's for school closed in 1964. Right, let's move on. Those of us children in 1920s and 1960s. Move on. Okay, on again. The village hall. Okay, well, you can see that right at the end there, and that is now the village hall of Carsluith, and it's now in a community trust. Okay, you can press again. It also was the smallest polling station in Galloway. Unfortunately, that closed last year as a polling station. Again, an indication of rural depopulation. Right, next please, the people. Okay. This shows the population decline during the last century. At the top is the population of Kirkbride parish, and that halved during this time. And below is the population of Carsluith, which went down by about 2/3. So it shows the general population decline. Next, please. Those are the households in Carsluith, again, rapidly declining. Okay, next please. And that's a graph of the occupations during that time. And these are taken from the records in the Ewart Library. The valuation rolls stopped giving occupations in 1961. But if you look at the top there, farmers, If you take farm workers, farmers, ploughmen, shepherds, in 1901, there were 72. In 1961, there were only 28, and now there are far fewer than that. Quarrymen, 29 in 1901, 2 in 1961, now none at all. Railway workers, 8. There's no station in Cretan now, so that's all gone. Fishermen, there were 5 people employed in the nets between Carsluith and Cretan before the nets all closed, so none there at all. And then, interestingly enough, in 1901, 4 blacksmiths, 2 joiners, and rather charmingly, 1 rabbit catcher and 1 mole catcher. So there were employment opportunities in those days, which sadly are no longer there. Could you just put on a bit? Next one. This is the Cretan Silver Band playing through the streets of Carsluith. The Cretan Silver Band is still very much a going concern, but only about 1 or 2 people actually live in Cretan. It covers the whole region. Next, please. That's Dr. Smith, the GP. What a difference between the GP practices now and what was happening then. He visits you on a tricycle. Next, please. That's one of the floats, and you can see that it's, blessing of the net. So fishing was really very important at that particular time. Okay. That's in 1909, and that's a picture in the summer. And what happened was that many people from Carsluith would have gone to Glasgow for jobs, and in the summer they come down for Glasgow Week, and the population really expanded with people living in attics and sheds and goodness knows where. Next, please. And then a similar picture down at Burnfoot on the shore, and you can see people gathering during their summer holidays. Okay. The quarries. This is a geological map of the area. I'm going to walk forward a bit because I need to point this out. You can see here, that is a granite dike coming through at Carsluith, and up there is a granite dike coming through at Kirkmabrec. And if you could look at Cairnsborough, it would be almost solid granite. And what happened was that granite's very heavy, and the only way you can transport it then, and probably now, is by sea. So having granite dikes coming out to the sea was really very important indeed. And the Kirkmabrec dike there, you can still see where some of you remember a crusher at the end of a pier there, which has now been demolished. That was taken over by the Liverpool Dock Board, and Liverpool docks were built from Kirkmabrec granite. Preston docks were built from Carsluith granite. So it was really very important, and they employed a lot of people. Next, please. That's a picture of the Carsluith quarry when it was fully functioning, and it closed in 1939 for reasons which will come later. If you look at the top there, you can see the open quarry there. To the left slightly, that's the bin where the residue of rocks went, which weren't required. And coming down here, you can see a railway. And they had trucks coming down, they paused at the weighbridge there. That's the old fish house there. And they come down to the pier where they'd be loaded onto boats. Next, please. And that's a more modern picture of those 2 buildings. You can see the weighbridge here. Someone's built a garage between the 2, and that's the old fish house. Next, please. That's the end of Carsluith Pier at low tide. And you can see it was built from very, very substantial blocks of granite. And they would have initially built it, presumably with using the railway to bring it down. Next, please. In 1939, in their wisdom, they decided to get some more granite out, so they organised a very large explosion. They had the foresight to evacuate the village, and unfortunately, it all went badly wrong. These are houses which were smashed during that 1939 explosion. Were about 2 lots of houses were broken, and cars, etc. So after that, the Carsluith quarry closed. Next, please. But there remained a stonemason there. That's Alec Minigan. His grandfather did an apprentice at the Carsluith quarry, and his father was manager at the Kirkmabrec quarries. So that tradition continued. Next, please. And that's Alec McLean, that's in 1974, and that's of a fell quarry. So there are really three quarries we're talking about. There's the Carsluith quarry, which is closed, we've seen that. The Kirkmabrec quarry, which is quite a big one, and you can see as you're going into Creetown on the right. But right up the hill is a fell quarry, which is a really steep quarry going right the way down. And I went down in one of the last buckets there in 1974. And I remember going up there, at that time, they hadn't got any diamond saws or anything, and there was a big shed on the top, and in it was a saw which went like that, and they poured carborundum and iron filings into it, gradually sawed through a granite block. Took about a few days, and that's how they managed the granite then. The Fell quarry was actually owned, I think it's still on stage, by an Aberdeen company, but again, that closed in 1974, Carsluith quarry in 1939, and that was the end really of quarrying in Carsluith. Next, please. The shop and post office. There were three shops and post offices, I told them together, in Carsluith at one stage. Indeed, in Creetown in the 1930s, we were told there were 30 shops. There are no shops in Carsluith now, and there's one in Creetown. And I remember in 1975, they decided to close the post office in Carsluith. And many attempts were made to keep it open, but rather like the banks now, people don't seem to be interested in local services. They closed it. One of the last shopkeepers, it was someone called Charlie Smith, and he wrote an article about it. He said, and he predicted what was going to happen, because in the 1970s, Edward Heath's government abolished RPM. Does anybody know what RPM stands for? Retail Price Maintenance. And that meant that a can of baked beans would cost exactly the same whether in a supermarket or a village shop. That all went. And that meant that small shops couldn't survive and everything would have to get bigger and bigger, because the bigger it was, the smaller the margins were acceptable. And we can see that happening now. Local shops are going to supermarkets, and now we go to, buy it all online. So we have a prediction of what was going to happen. Next, please. Yeah, that's one of the shops, that's a Dressmark. And at that time, quarry workers would have tokens which they'd use to pay for their produce. Next, please. The corn mill. That's the corn mill at Carsluith. There was James V actually had granted a charter for the corn mill in 1527. In the 1800s, the McCure family from Sorby had the corn mill with a small holding. And one of the appendices in the book gives details that David McClure kept a diary between 1867 and 1885. He died in 1903. And it's a fascinating description of the rotation of crops, oats, turnips, potatoes. You'd have a pig, perhaps one or two cows, and he did some carting as well. It was taken over by the McGuffey family, and they kept the corn mill going until 1947, just after the war. And at that time, scrap metal was extremely valuable, and scrap merchants were coming out, and they stripped the whole thing out, and all the wheels of the machinery went. And tells a story of how, two things, when he was a lad in the mill, how tramps would come along and they would keep the fires going in the kiln during the night, before oats were ground up, because mainly oats at that time in the mill. They come in and get breakfast, and that was the deal, and they go away again. The other thing you can remember was that the family would sit round in the winter carving the wooden cogwheels from bog oak, because it was very hard, and the reason for having wooden cogs was that you didn't get sparks, which might set off a fire. And indeed, there was a fire there, which caused one problem at one stage. Next, please. And that's actually what remains of the corn mill, which is now the machinery is gone. Next, please. Housing. That's a picture from the 18th century, and you can see it was a thatched house, and of course a lot of houses at that stage were thatched. I'm told that the last thatched house in Galloway was Lower Lagan. That's the cottage on the side of the A75 opposite the entrance to Lagan. You can look at the roof and it's like that, The last thatched house in Galloway. Next, please. That's a picture of Carsluith, and you can see houses there, but they were all attics. You see the skylights, they all had skylights there. And those would have many children would have slept in the attics. And that gradually changed. Next, please. Those are the Waterloo cottages, which are built for quarry workers. And you can see that the skylights have been replaced by more substantial windows. At one stage, in those 6 houses, there were 27 people living, with children and parents. And now, 1. The rest are holiday homes. Okay, next please. Then on the other side are slightly more substantial houses with proper second floors, and people like the quarry manager would have lived there. Next please. But as well as that, there were temporary houses on the shore. This is at the weir, where a whole family were brought up. And what happened was these temporary houses, which had no sanitation or running water, there was a local burn, the local authorities said, well, these are insanitary, and the moment anybody left them, they had to be demolished. We weren't allowed to continue habitation there. Next, please. Farming. In the catchment area of a school, in 1900, there were 9 farms. They were family farms, and they were all originated from the enclosures of the 18th and 19th century. But in the 20th century, with casualties from the First World War, Second World War, inheritance tax, and then gradually we were in the States, they were broken up. Quite interesting, I looked at a lease in 1889 for Carsluith Farm. For some reason, these old leases were for 19 years. I've no idea why 19 years. Does anybody know? The only thing I can think of is that phases of the moon. Anyhow, they laid down very carefully the rotations. I had fallow, and then turnips, and then roots, and then oats, mainly oats rather than barley. What a difference from what you see now. You travel from Dumfries to Stranraer, and what do you see? Monoculture silage. And many people feel that the fertility of the soil is not going to survive that. And nitrogen for maybe 3 cuts a year for more than another 30 or 40 years. That's another story. Okay, so those are the farms there. For instance, just as an example about employment, 1960s, well, could you go back, please? Okay, Begbie and Daffing farms, they would have had 5 families living there and working on it, and now there's 1. And Curdle, Carsluith and Stones are all amalgamated now, and there's 1 person. But ploughing things is done by contractors, so it's a different way of doing things. Okay, next please. And that's a ploughing competition, Carsluith. That would have been probably in the 1930s. Next please. And again, planting potatoes. Remember Carsluith, early meadows, early potatoes, very, very important. You see those in a big way if you go up the Ayrshire coast now by Girvan. Next, please. And milk, local milk. Most farms will have had, say, 10, 20 cows, their own deeds and selling a bit. Now we have massive dairies, goodness knows how many cows, and very big farms and mechanical milking. Next, please. That's just a curiosity, really. If you go driving towards Creetown from Gatehouse, you pass Carsluith Castle on the left, and just beyond it in a field is a barn, and remains of an old slip barn. And if you stand on the side of the road, which now is rather dangerous, but you can do, and shout, you get a very pronounced echo. And that was always known as going, in the old days, villagers would go and beat at the echo, meet at the echo barn. You can try it works very well, it's a very loud echo. Next, please. Fishing. This is taken from Walter King. Anybody know who Walter King Webster? He had the Innerwell fisheries. He kept very good records of the fishing, and he at one stage had the Carsluith fishing as well. And these are the facts, the figures for fishing in the last century. And you can, well, no, hang on, let's have a look. No, this is between 1960 and 200. The top line there's a grilse, there's a 1-year-old salmon. The second line in red, those are for salmon. You can see how they gradually come down, and the green line is for sea trout. And in 2000, there were virtually no fish caught at all. Why? Big question. partly, I think, forestry, acidification of the peat flowing into the rivers didn't do any good for salmon spawning, but probably the main reason was that the trawlers found where the salmon was spawning out to sea and just caught them. Icelandic trawlers, etc. Anyhow, there are no state fishing nets left. They're banned in the Solway. Next, please. That's a picture of the nets. You can see, basically, the idea was you put a net right out into the bay, and on the seaside there were pockets there, and the pockets, the entrance of the pockets was only about halfway. So the fish would swim up to the river, hit the net, go along to the pocket, be there, and when the tide went out, they'd be trapped. And next, please. That's one of the last fishermen, Jodwa Kraken, and those are the nets in front of Burnfoot there. You can see them going out, remember, leaders into the pockets there. And he eventually became a minister, so he became a fisher of men rather than a fisher of fish. Next, please. That was Willie Ray, another fisherman there. And I once asked his widow, Mrs. Ray, who sadly has recently died, I said, did you have good years and bad years? She said, we had good years and better years. One tide, 97. And what would happen? They would be taken up to a fish house, okay? They'd be packed into boxes, a flag would go up, a horse and cart would take them up to Creetown Station. There was a station then in Billingsgate the next morning. A very flourishing industry, all gone. Next, please. And that's just another picture of the, you can see the fish house there. To the right is the old weighbridge, and this is a tar boiler here where they would tar the nets in the winter because they had to come out in the winter and be tarred. So there was quite a lot of upkeep going on. Next, please. That is Adam Birrell. Adam Birrell was a fisherman and a naturalist, very well known. And what he's got there, do anyone know what that is? It's a punt gun. Lethal things. They fill them all with shotguns and nails and goodness knows what, creep up on some unsuspecting duck and then fire off. And lots of wounding. It's a pretty horrible thing, actually. And you can see he's carrying duck now. He was a great friend of Peter Scott, okay? And Peter Scott used to come down and punt gun with Adam Birrell, but he got rather sickened by this and he became a conservationist and founded Slimbridge and wildfowl preservation. He's the son of Scott of the Antarctic. And he used to stay down at Carsluith and go out with Willie Birrell. Next, please. That is the Annie. That's an Annan Whammel. And that was sailed by the Birrells, and it was bought by John Schuyler, who kept it at the Isle of Whitthorn for a time, and then he eventually donated it to the Creetown Museum. And actually, that boat is still, if you go behind the Barhome Arms in Creetown, you can still see the hull of that boat, which has been renovated. And next, please. And before I go on to that, they used to have sailing regattas on Wigton Bay, mainly from Creetown. So sailing was quite partly fishing, but partly for sport, for entertainment. You now very rarely see sailing boats on Wigton Bay, partly because it is quite shallow. The channel moves. I used to sail a motor dinghy there, and I can remember capsizing in the middle and getting out to walk because centre plate caught a bunch. And anyhow, it's a difficult place to sail in. The sawmill. This is Alec Vidler. He was the person who actually restored the sawmill there. There'd been one there for since 1840, as we know, and it was a wooden wheel, and it was used by the estate for chopping up wood. Obviously, we restored it. It was restored in about 2010 by Alec Vidler. Next, please. And you can see inside there's the wheel, which is a 13-foot wheel, 14-foot diameter wheel. It was made by J&R Wallace of Castle Douglas, a foundry which has since gone. That would have gone round at about something like 500 RPM. It's a very powerful machine and would have been the estate sawmill, and the estate joiner would have worked there. It was formed into a men's shed in 2020. Unfortunately, that coincided with two things. One was COVID, so we had to close it down. and the second was a flash flood which swept away the weir from a mill pond which had been there for almost 200 years. So we're now trying to restore that, but that might take a bit of time. Next, please. Oh, what's happened? Oh, right, okay, Curdle House. Right. Curdle House was built in 1787, that's the date given, by Samuel Hannay. He was the son of the farmers at Curdle, and they come over from Sorby in the 16th century. Remember 1707, the Union of the Parliaments, and a lot of Scots went down to London, and from there we went out to India. So it was a great opening up of the world and trade. Samuel Hannay made a fortune for himself in London making patent medicines for unmentionable diseases, and he also looked after his brother, who was Alexander Hannay, who went out to India and was Adjutant General of the East India Company Army, where he shook the pagoda tree, as they say, made a lot of money, and left it to his brother, who was looking after his affairs in London. He was one of the witnesses at the trial of Warren Hastings. That's the whole business of how the East India Company came to be under suspicion for a variety of reasons. Anyhow, Curdle House was a fire there in the 1880s, something like that, and there you can see workmen who were redoing it, and then subsequent to that it was divided up into separate houses, separate flats or apartments, and that is as it is now. Next, please. That's a picture of the headmaster of the Carsluith School with May Day celebrations at Curdle House. May Day was also called Empire Day, not politically correct today. That was a school holiday, and all the school children were lined up, and we'd walk all the way to Curdle for the celebrations there. Next, please. And that's a picture of a Sunday school, and the teacher there is Neil McGilp, who was a joiner at Curdle, and he took the Sunday school. Next, please. There are 3 bridges at Curdle. That's the old bridge, and that was built probably about 1890, something like that. And if you go underneath it, you can see that it was actually doubled in size. In the 1950s, they built the present conduit over the Curdle Burn, which is the A75. And the 3rd bridge is further up. If you go past the sawmill, past Barholme Castle, that's the old Packhorse Road. That was the original road at that part of the world. They got a bit worried a few years ago because otters were getting killed on the A75 because they came up from the shore, tried to get up, crossed the road, and got killed. So they decided to build an otter run. Considerable expense, and if you look under the present conduit, A75, you can see this run going along. I think it's so positive. We always wondered what would happen. Did you put a sort of signpost saying otters this way? But actually what happened, they eventually built some sort of fences like that, or wire fences, so the otters should go. And otters do go up the burn, and not so many are now killed on the road. What you do see a lot of animals killed on the road are what? Badgers, yes, lots of badgers. And I suspect, if you looked at some of them, they might have a bullet hole in the head. We have 2 protected animals in the UK. They both begin with B. Badgers and bats. Bats. You're not meant to chop a tree down unless you make sure there aren't any bats up. Badgers, I always blame Beatrix Potter for making badgers nice cuddly things. But if you go into a lambing field and there is a ewe or a lamb is dead, if its throat is caught away, that's a fox. If its guts are taken out, it's a badger. Badgers have an effect, they're an apex predator. What animal have not survived badgers in this part of the world? You don't see them very much, huh? Hedgehogs, yeah. Well, you always used to put in cattle grids, you put a little sort of ladder up so the hedgehogs could get out. There aren't any more. Badgers have got them. Anyhow, that's a diversion. The bridges. Next, please. And that's a party at Curdle Port in 1913. A whole gathering there, a lot of people. That subsequently became a scout camp. Remember, scout camp moved, I think, to Sand Green now, so it's really quite desolate. If you go down to Curdle Port, there's just the remains of an old jetty. And that jetty would have welcomed I think it was a Queen of Galloway, the Countess of Galloway, which was a pedal steamer which came up from Liverpool. And there was a big, big connection between Galloway and Liverpool, because it was easier to go to Liverpool from Galloway than it was to go to Glasgow. So it almost were more connections there than there were to Glasgow, but again, many connections to both places. Next, please. And that's Ravenshaw, it's on the right. That was a coaching inn and is now a private house. And it was where my grandparents' generation moved when there was a large fire at Curdle. They couldn't really afford to do it up and live in it, so they rented it out and lived there. Right, next please. That's it. In the book, there are 5 appendices, and I'll tell you what they are. The first is giving the farms and field names roundabout. The second is David McClure's diary. Now, David McClure, if you remember, was a miller at Carsluith, and he wrote this diary, and it's really quite fascinating, actually. It gives details of the farming year, and also about the corn mill, because after all, he was the miller there, he had a small holding. There are other events which went on. Leg hurt at Curdle with cart, all sorts of details of his life. And then some remedies, lots of rather nice remedies. To guard horses from flies, wash for part with the extract of pennyroyal. Flies will never alight on the spot to which it is applied. Anybody heard of that before? I haven't, but he's got lots of nice remedies, yeah? And then in Appendix 3 is Campbell Christie. Does that name ring a bell? Campbell Christie? He was a Secretary General of the Trade Union Congress for Scotland, a CBE. He was brought up at the Burkes in Carsluith, one of 6 children. His father died young, probably from granite dust. He was a quarryman, and he became really quite well known. And in Appendix 3 gives his transcript of his program on the BBC, and saying how important it was a local community to be part of. And that community has really gone. And you can remember playing football against Gatehouse on the shore there, and was really, really quite important. The 4th appendix is some local poems. There are 4 of those, some of which were in Carsluith Hall. And the last appendix 5 is of audio recordings. Now, the origins of this book, really, because I was quite keen on recording elderly people to get their memories. I remember one going to an old fisherman, and he said, you just want me before I'm aware. And I said, you did right, I do, yes. Because, so these are memories of people who lived in a rural community, which worked, which was important. And those recordings, I had about 40 of them, actually, and I didn't know what to do with them, a family one. And then it so happened there was a thing called the European Ethnological Research Centre, who set up a research unit in Edinburgh. So I sent these old tape recordings, up to them. They digitalised them, and if you go to the 5th appendix in the book, you can go to a website and you can put in Carsluith and you listen to these recordings. So that was the origins of the book. Anyhow, well, thank you for listening. What strikes me about it all when thinking about it is actually the pace of change. It's been incredibly quick. And only a generation or so, we've seen these huge changes in population, in work potential, etc., etc. And I think it's due to 3 things in Carsluith, anyhow. First of all, farming. And what happened after the war, after 1945, was the advent of the tractor. Okay, all before it was horses. Once tractors came in, then gradually the workforce went down and down and down, and now it's all done largely by contractors with enormous foraging machines for silage. The second reason was quarrying. Now, okay, that's specific to Carsluith because it was a quarrying centre, but employed large numbers of people, and that's all gone, so that's it. And the third thing is fishing. Many people, but there aren't any fish. They've been overfished. So that's that's one example of rural depopulation, which is happening all over Europe and increasingly all over the world. Thank you very much.